The leather chairs in Mr. Harrison's law office felt stiff against my back as I sat there, still processing the fact that Grandma Rose was really gone. The mahogany conference table stretched between all of us like a battlefield, and I could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Derek strutted around the room like he owned the place, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He had that same smug expression he'd worn since we were kids, the one that said he knew something you didn't. His tailored navy suit probably cost more than I made in 2 months at the coffee shop, and he made sure everyone noticed by adjusting his gold cufflinks every few minutes. "Let's just get this over with," Derek announced, not even bothering to look at me as he positioned himself near Mr. Harrison's desk, like he was already claiming his territory. "We all know how this is going to go." I shifted uncomfortably in my corner chair, the same spot where I always seemed to end up at family gatherings. Invisible, overlooked, the grieving granddaughter who didn't quite fit the family mold. My simple black dress felt shabby compared to everyone else's funeral attire, but it was the nicest thing I owned. Uncle Tom nodded approvingly at his son from across the room. "Derek's always been responsible with money," he said, straightening his tie. "Rose knew she could trust him with the family assets." Aunt Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I hadn't seen any actual tears. "It's what Mother would have wanted," she murmured. "Keeping everything in the family name with someone who understands business." That's when Derek turned toward me, and I saw that familiar glint in his eyes. The same look he'd given me when we were 12, and he told everyone at Christmas dinner that my homemade gifts were cute, but not very valuable. My stomach dropped because I knew what was coming. "Let's be honest here," Derek said, his voice carrying that condescending tone I'd heard my entire life. He gestured toward me like I was an afterthought. "Maya won't get a cent from Grandma's will. She was never close to her like the rest of us were." The words hit me like a physical blow. Never close to her? I thought about every Saturday morning I'd spent in Rose's kitchen, flour in my hair and stories filling the air. I thought about the countless afternoons we'd spent going through old photo albums, her teaching me family history that Derek had never bothered to learn. I thought about holding her hand during her chemotherapy appointments while Derek was too busy with work to visit. But before I could even process the hurt fully, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. I looked up to see him reaching for a sealed envelope I'd never noticed before, one that looked different from the other legal documents scattered across his desk. There was something almost secretive about the way he handled it, and when he looked up at Derek, there was the slightest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Actually, Derek," Mr. Harrison said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable note of satisfaction, "she left everything to her." The room went completely silent. Derek's confident smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of confusion that would have been funny if my heart wasn't pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. 6 months earlier, I was standing in Grandma Rose's sunny kitchen, the same kitchen where Derek's cruel words would later echo in my memory. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, and golden sunlight streamed through her lace curtains, casting dancing shadows across the worn linoleum floor that had seen decades of family meals and quiet conversations. "Maya, sweetheart, come help me with these cookies," Rose called out, her voice still strong then, before the cancer treatments began stealing pieces of her away. She was wearing her favorite apron, the one with tiny blue flowers that I'd given her for Mother's Day 3 years ago. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, and her eyes sparkled with the same mischief I remembered from childhood. This had become our ritual. Every Saturday at 9 in the morning, I'd drive the 20 minutes from my cramped studio apartment to Rose's house, a cozy 2-bedroom cottage she'd shared with Grandpa until he passed 5 years ago. While my cousins slept off their Friday night parties or caught up on work emails, I treasured these quiet mornings with the woman who'd always made me feel like I mattered. "Tell me again about the secret ingredient," I said, tying my own apron around my waist. It was an old one of hers, faded yellow with little strawberries, that she'd insisted I keep there for our baking sessions. Rose chuckled, her hands already working the butter and sugar together with practiced ease. "It's not really secret, dear one. It's just a pinch of cardamom that my mother taught me to add. She said it makes people feel loved when they taste it. even if they can't quite figure out why. I watched her weathered hands move with grace and precision, the same hands that had braided my hair when I was little, applauded at my high school graduation when my parents were working, and held mine during my worst breakup 2 years ago. These Saturday mornings weren't just about baking. They were about connection, about stories, about feeling like I belonged somewhere. "You know," Rose said, glancing at me with a knowing smile as we worked side by side, "you remind me so much of myself at your age, sweetheart. You see beauty in simple things. You understand that the best moments aren't the loudest ones." I felt my cheeks warm at her words. In a family where success was measured by salary figures and social media followers, Rose was the only one who seemed to value my quiet nature, my love for art, my tendency to listen more than I spoke. "Derek called yesterday," she continued, rolling out the dough with steady strokes. "He was telling me about some big promotion at work. Very exciting, I'm sure." She paused, looking directly at me. "But do you know what made me happier? Knowing that in just a few hours you'd be walking through that door with your sketchbook and your stories about the interesting people you meet at the coffee shop." As we slid the first batch of cookies into the oven, Rose pulled out an old shoebox filled with photographs. "Come sit with me, Maya. Let me tell you about the time your great-grandmother taught me this same recipe during the Great Depression. She used to say that sharing food was how we shared love." We spent the next 2 hours looking through decades of family photos, Rose's voice painting pictures of relatives I'd never met, but felt like I knew by the end of our conversation. Growing up in my family was like being a whisper in a room full of shouting voices. While Derek commanded attention with his loud opinions and expensive tastes, I was the quiet one sketching in corners, observing rather than performing. At every family gathering, the same pattern would unfold like a tired script I'd memorized against my will. "Derek just closed another major deal," Uncle Tom would announce proudly, his chest puffing out like a peacock showing off its feathers. "6 figures this quarter alone. The boy's got a real head for business, just like his old man." Derek would lean back in whatever chair he'd claimed as his throne for the evening, usually the best seat in the living room, and launch into detailed stories about his latest financial conquests. He drove a silver BMW that he parked strategically in front of the house so everyone would notice it. His designer clothes always looked like they'd just come off the rack, and he wore success like cologne, heavy and impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, I'd sit cross-legged on the floor or in whatever chair nobody else wanted, my worn canvas messenger bag beside me, containing my sketchbook and the stack of coffee-stained notebooks where I kept my drawings and story ideas. My clothes came from thrift stores and discount racks, not because I was trying to make a statement, but because my part-time barista salary at Moonbeam Coffee barely covered rent and art supplies. "Maya's still figuring things out, aren't you, dear?" Aunt Linda would say, with that particular smile that looked supportive, but felt like pity. She'd pat my shoulder the way you'd comfort a child who hadn't quite learned to tie their shoes yet. "Art school is so creative. I'm sure you'll find something more practical eventually." The family gatherings became a showcase of Derek's achievements versus my apparent lack thereof. He'd talk about his corner office, his investment portfolio, his expensive dinners with clients, while I'd mention getting a drawing featured in the coffee shop's local artist rotation, only to watch eyes glaze over with polite disinterest. "That's nice, honey," Mom would say, trying to bridge the gap between worlds. But even she seemed uncomfortable when Derek would interrupt with another story about his latest business trip to Chicago or his weekend golf games with potential investors. I learned to make myself small during these gatherings, disappearing into my sketchbook while conversations flowed around me. I'd draw the family dynamics unfolding before me, Uncle Tom's proud gestures, Aunt Linda's performative concern, Derek's confident posture that took up twice as much space as anyone else's. Art became my refuge and my language, the way I made sense of feeling like an outsider in my own family. The worst part wasn't the dismissive comments or the way conversations would die when I tried to contribute something about my work or interests. The worst part was how normal it all seemed to everyone else. Derek's success was celebrated and expected, while my different path was treated like a phase I'd eventually outgrow, like a childhood obsession with fairy tales or imaginary friends. Even at 24, working my way toward a degree in graphic design while supporting myself, I was still seen as the family member who hadn't figured it out yet. The dreamer. The impractical one. The girl who would probably always need someone else to take care of the important things, like inheriting family property or carrying on family legacies. Little did any of us know how wrong we all were. 3 months before Grandma Rose's passing, my phone rang on a Tuesday morning while I was rushing to get ready for my shift at Moonbeam Coffee. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was probably another telemarketer, but something made me swipe to accept the call. Maya Chen? The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, completely unlike the usual wrong number calls I received. Yes, this is Maya, I said, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear while trying to find my car keys in the chaos of my tiny apartment. This is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian Design Studios. We received your portfolio submission, and we'd like to offer you a position as a junior graphic designer. The salary is $45,000 to start, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement. I froze completely, my keys forgotten in my hand. Meridian Design Studios was the most prestigious design firm in the city, the kind of place I'd dreamed about working but never thought would actually consider someone like me. Their client list included major corporations and local businesses I'd admired for years. This wasn't just a job offer. It was validation that my years of struggle, my unconventional path, my quiet persistence had finally led somewhere meaningful. Are you serious? I stammered, sitting down hard on my secondhand couch. Jennifer laughed warmly. Very serious. Your portfolio stood out among hundreds of applications. There's something authentic and emotionally resonant about your work that caught our creative director's attention immediately. Can you start Monday? After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for 10 minutes before the reality hit me. I was going to be a real graphic designer at a real design firm. No more explaining my artistic phase to family members. No more defensive conversations about when I was going to get a real job. No more watching Derek's eyebrows raise skeptically whenever I mentioned my career goals. The first person I called was Rose. "Grandma, I got it," I said breathlessly when she answered, my words tumbling over each other in excitement. "The design job I applied for. They want me to start next week." "Oh, Maya." Rose's voice was weaker than it had been just months before, but I could hear genuine joy breaking through the exhaustion that had become her constant companion since starting chemotherapy. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Tell me everything." I spent 20 minutes describing the office, the projects I'd be working on, the creative team I'd be joining. Rose listened to every detail, asking questions and celebrating each small aspect of my new opportunity like it was the most important news she'd ever heard. "You're going to do amazing things," she whispered, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, Maya. You have something special, something that can't be taught or bought. Promise me you'll remember that." "I promise, Grandma. Thank you for believing in me when nobody else did." "I always believed in you, dear one, and I always will." For the first time since college graduation, I felt like I was finally stepping into the person I was meant to become. Maybe now the family would see me differently. Maybe Derek's condescending comments would stop. Maybe I could prove that my quiet, different path had been worth taking all along. I hung up feeling like everything was about to change for the better, completely unaware that within 3 months, I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, grieving the loss of the one person who had always seen my potential. The funeral home smelled like lilies and grief, that particular combination of flowers and sadness that seems to cling to your clothes long after you leave. Rose's casket was surrounded by the most beautiful arrangements I'd ever seen. White roses, pink carnations, and baby's breath that looked like clouds of hope in a room full of sorrow. I stood near the back, wearing the same black dress I'd later wear to the will reading, watching as family members and friends paid their respects. Derek commanded the receiving line like he was hosting a business networking event, shaking hands firmly and accepting condolences with the practiced grace of someone who knew how to work a room. "Thank you so much for coming," he said to each visitor, his voice carrying just the right amount of grief mixed with strength. Grandma Rose would be so touched to see how many lives she affected. I had been standing there for over an hour, greeting Rose's friends and neighbors, sharing quiet memories with people who remembered her kindness. Mrs. Patterson from next door told me how Rose always spoke about our Saturday mornings together. "She used to say you were the light of her life," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You made her so happy, dear." That's when I decided to step outside for some air. The funeral home felt suffocating, and I needed a moment to process everything. I walked toward the side garden, where Rose's favorite flowers, the same ones from her kitchen windowsill, grew in neat rows. I was about to sit on the small bench when I heard Derek's voice drifting from around the corner. He was talking to Uncle Tom near the large flower arrangements that lined the building's entrance. Something in his tone made me pause, hidden by the tall funeral wreaths. "At least we won't have to worry about Grandma's house going to someone who can't appreciate it," Derek was saying, his voice carrying that casual confidence I knew so well. I heard the sound of him adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "What do you mean?" Uncle Tom asked, though his tone suggested he already knew where this conversation was heading. "Come on, Dad. We both know Maya's sweet and all, but she's not exactly family legacy material, you know?" Derek's words hit me like ice water. She's been struggling to make ends meet her whole life. Even with that new job she's so excited about, she's still not really substantial, not like family property requires. Uncle Tom chuckled, a sound that made my stomach turn. "You're right, son. Rose always had a soft spot for Maya, but she was practical about important things. The house, the savings, the family heirlooms, those need to go to someone who can handle them responsibly." "Exactly," Derek continued, and I could hear him walking closer to where I was hidden. "Maya's got her art and her coffee shop job, which is fine for her, but Grandma's estate needs someone with real financial sense, someone who understands property values and investment potential." I pressed my back against the wall, hoping they wouldn't see me, but also unable to move away from hearing more. "Besides," Derek added with a laugh that sounded cruel in the shadow of Rose's funeral, "Maya was never really close to Grandma anyway. Not like the rest of us who actually spent quality time with her." My heart shattered completely. Never close to her? I thought about every chemotherapy appointment, every Saturday morning, every phone call where Rose had encouraged my dreams when everyone else dismissed them. As their footsteps faded back toward the funeral home, I realized Derek hadn't just assumed he would inherit everything. He'd already decided I didn't deserve it. The weeks following Rose's funeral felt like living in a fog where nothing seemed real or solid. I kept expecting to wake up from this nightmare where the one person who truly understood me was gone, and the family I'd grown up with had revealed themselves to be strangers who saw me as nothing more than a charity case. Derek wasted no time making his intentions clear. At the first family dinner after the funeral, he arrived with a leather portfolio and a tablet, spreading papers across Mom's dining room table like he was conducting a board meeting. "I've been thinking about Grandma's house," he announced, not even waiting for everyone to finish their soup. "The property value has increased significantly in the last 5 years. With some strategic renovations, we could either flip it for a substantial profit or turn it into a rental property." Uncle Tom nodded approvingly, cutting his roast beef with the precision of someone who'd already made up his mind. "That's smart thinking, Derek. Rose would want her investment to keep growing." I set down my spoon, my appetite completely gone. "Don't you think we should wait until after the will reading before making plans?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Derek barely glanced at me. "Maya, I appreciate your sentiment, but we need to be practical here. The house is going to need maintenance, whether we keep it or sell it. I'm just thinking ahead." "But what about her things?" I pressed on, feeling increasingly desperate. "Her recipe boxes, her photo albums, her garden. She spent 40 years making that house a home." Aunt Linda reached across the table and patted my hand with that same patronizing gesture I'd endured my entire life. "Oh, honey, Derek will make sure the important family items are preserved properly. He's got connections with estate sale companies that specialize in vintage pieces. Estate sale companies. They were talking about selling Rose's memories to strangers before she'd even been gone a month. I could help organize everything, I offered, hating how small my voice sounded. I know where she kept everything important. I could make sure family photos and recipes stay in the family. That's sweet of you, Derek said, his tone suggesting it was anything but sweet. But this kind of thing requires someone with experience in estate management. I've already contacted a professional service that handles these situations. Mom looked uncomfortable but didn't speak up. She'd always been caught between her family and her late husband's family, trying to keep peace by avoiding conflict. I realized I was completely alone in this room full of people who shared my blood, but not my heart. After dinner, I sat in my car in Mom's driveway for 20 minutes, staring at Rose's last voicemail on my phone. She'd left it 3 days before she passed. Her voice barely a whisper, but still full of love. Maya, sweetheart, I was just thinking about you and hoping your new job is going well. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. You have such a beautiful heart, and I know you're going to do wonderful things with your life. I love you, dear one. I played it over and over, tears streaming down my face, because it was the only proof I had left that someone in this family had seen me as more than an afterthought. Derek could plan and scheme all he wanted, but he couldn't take away the fact that Rose had loved me exactly as I was. The loneliness was crushing, but somehow, sitting there in the dark, I felt Rose's presence reminding me that love isn't measured by inheritance or family politics. It's measured by the time you spend showing up for people when they need you most. It was another painful family dinner 3 weeks after the funeral, and Derek had outdone himself this time. He'd brought actual blueprints of Rose's house, spreading them across the coffee table like a general planning a military campaign. I watched in horror as he pointed to various rooms with a red pen, marking areas for renovation potential and modern updates. The kitchen is completely outdated, Derek was saying to Uncle Tom, circling Rose's beloved cooking space where we'd spent countless Saturday mornings. We could knock out this wall, install granite countertops, maybe add an island, really open up the space for better resale value. I felt sick watching him casually erase the heart of Rose's home with red ink. That kitchen wasn't outdated. It was full of memories, stories, and love. The worn linoleum had seen decades of family meals. The old wooden cabinets held Rose's carefully organized spice collection and her grandmother's china. What about her garden? I asked desperately, watching Derek mark the backyard as potential deck expansion space. She spent years growing those flowers. Some of those plants are older than I am. Derek didn't even look up from his blueprints. Maya, you can't make emotional decisions about property. Gardens require maintenance that most buyers won't want to deal with. A deck adds functional square footage and increases property value. Aunt Linda nodded sagely from her spot on the couch. Derek's right, dear. You have to think practically about these things. Rose would want us to make smart financial decisions. I felt my chest tightening with frustration and grief. How could they be so cold about the place that had been Rose's sanctuary? How could they reduce her life to square footage and resale value? That's when Mom quietly stood up from the kitchen doorway where she'd been listening. Maya, would you help me with the dishes? She asked, her voice carrying a subtle urgency that only I seemed to notice. In the kitchen, away from the Blueprint War Council, Mom turned on the faucet louder than necessary and moved close to me. Her hands shook slightly as she handed me a dish towel, and I could see something in her eyes that looked like barely contained anger. I can't listen to another minute of this, she whispered, glancing toward the living room to make sure we couldn't be overheard. They're talking about your grandmother, like she was just another piece of property to be managed. I was shocked. Mom had never openly criticized Uncle Tom's family before. She'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and avoided taking sides. Your grandmother saw something special in you that others missed, Mom continued, her voice getting stronger despite being quiet. She used to call me every week, Maya, every single week, just to talk about your visits and how much joy you brought her. My eyes filled with tears. She did? Every Saturday night, like clockwork, Mom said, actually smiling now. She'd tell me about whatever you two had baked together, or some story you'd shared, or how proud she was of your artwork. She'd say, "That girl has such a beautiful soul, Sarah. She sees the world the way it should be seen." Mom grabbed my shoulders gently. Rose loved all her grandchildren, but what she had with you was different. It was real and deep and based on who you actually are, not what you could do for her or what you represented. Then why does everyone act like Derek was closer to her? Because Derek was louder about it, Mom said firmly. But love isn't about being loud, honey. Your grandmother knew the difference between someone who visits because they should and someone who visits because they want to. Don't let them make you feel small or invisible. Rose saw you clearly, and she loved what she saw. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel completely alone. In the quiet weeks that followed Mom's revelation, I threw myself into my new job at Meridian Design Studios with a fierce determination I'd never felt before. If my family couldn't see my worth, I'd prove it to myself and anyone else who was willing to pay attention. My cubicle became my sanctuary, surrounded by design books, color swatches, and my laptop displaying the latest project. I felt more at home than I had anywhere else in months. Jennifer Walsh, the creative director who'd hired me, noticed my dedication immediately. "Maya, this campaign concept is exceptional," she said one Thursday afternoon, leaning over my shoulder to examine the mock-ups I'd created for a local restaurant chain. "The way you've captured the essence of comfort food while keeping it modern and appealing, it's exactly what the client was hoping for, but couldn't articulate." The campaign featured warm, inviting imagery that reminded me of Rose's kitchen, but with a contemporary twist that spoke to younger audiences. Without realizing it, I'd been channeling all those Saturday mornings into my professional work, translating the love and warmth I'd experienced with Rose into visual storytelling. "I want you to present this to the client yourself," Jennifer continued. "You understand their vision better than anyone else on the team." That presentation led to my first major success. The client not only approved the campaign, but specifically requested me for 2 additional projects. Within a month, I was featured in the local design magazine's Rising Talent section, with a full-page spread about my work and artistic philosophy. Maya Chen brings an emotional authenticity to her designs that resonates across demographics, the article read. Her ability to find beauty in everyday moments translates into marketing campaigns that feel genuine rather than manufactured. I bought 5 copies of that magazine. One went on my refrigerator, one stayed in my portfolio, and one went into a special box I'd started keeping, a collection of everything that proved I was more than the family failure Derek thought I was. But the most meaningful project happened at home, in the evenings after work. I'd begun organizing all the photos, recipes, and memories I'd shared with Rose into a beautiful digital scrapbook. Using my design skills, I created a comprehensive archive of our relationship. Every Saturday morning documented with photos, every recipe carefully scanned and organized, every story Rose had told me transcribed in elegant typography. As I worked through the materials, I discovered something that made my heart race. Hidden in Rose's recipe box, I found a manila envelope with my name written in her careful handwriting. Inside were newspaper clippings about my high school art show, a copy of my college graduation program, screenshots of my social media posts about getting the Meridian job, and even a printout of the online article about my design work. Rose had been quietly following my career progress, saving every achievement, no matter how small. There were also handwritten notes in the margins. "So proud of my Maya," next to my graduation photo. "She gets it," beside an Instagram post where I'd shared a photo of wildflowers I'd found on a hiking trail, and "This is who she really is," written next to the magazine article about my work. At the bottom of the envelope was a small card in Rose's handwriting. "For Maya, proof that you were always exactly who you were meant to be. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Love always, Grandma Rose." I sat on my apartment floor crying, surrounded by evidence that Rose had seen me, truly seen me, in ways I hadn't even realized. While Derek was busy performing success for the family's approval, Rose had been quietly documenting my journey, celebrating my victories and believing in my potential even when I doubted it myself. That night, I realized I didn't need my family's validation anymore. I had something far more valuable: the knowledge that the person who mattered most had always been proud of exactly who I was. While I was quietly building my career and discovering Rose's hidden collection of my achievements, Derek's arrogance reached new heights that would have been comical if they weren't so painful to witness. He began treating Rose's estate like his personal kingdom, making increasingly bold moves that showed just how certain he was about his inheritance. 2 months after the funeral, Derek showed up at the next family dinner with a middle-aged woman in a sharp business suit and an expensive leather briefcase. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Patricia Williams from Premier Estate Realty," he announced, guiding her into Mom's living room like he was hosting the gathering himself. Patricia smiled professionally and pulled out a tablet, immediately launching into market analysis. "Based on comparable sales in the neighborhood, your grandmother's property should list between 450 and 480, she said, showing Derek charts and graphs like they were old friends. "With some strategic updates, we could push that closer to 500,000. I watched in disbelief from the kitchen doorway. Derek hadn't just brought a real estate agent to dinner. He'd brought the real estate agent, complete with listing proposals and renovation timelines. Uncle Tom was nodding enthusiastically, asking detailed questions about closing costs and market timing. "What's the average time on market for properties in that price range?" Uncle Tom inquired, leaning forward with the intensity of someone planning a major business deal. 60 to 90 days with the right staging," Patricia replied confidently. "Derek mentioned you might want to do some updates first, which I think is smart. A modern kitchen renovation alone could add 20 to 30,000 in value." Derek was practically glowing with pride. "I've already gotten preliminary quotes from 3 contractors," he said, pulling out his phone to show Patricia photos he'd apparently taken during unauthorized visits to Rose's house. "The kitchen renovation runs about 15,000, but the return on investment makes it a no-brainer." I felt sick watching him swipe through photos of Rose's beloved kitchen from different angles, marked up with measurements and notes about improvement potential. When had he even been there? Had he made copies of keys? The casual invasion of Rose's privacy, even after her death, felt like a violation of everything she'd held sacred. "Derek's always been the business mind of the family," Aunt Linda said proudly, refilling Patricia's wineglass. "His grandmother raised him to think strategically about these things." The most disturbing part was how normal this all seemed to everyone else. Mom looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. Uncle Tom was already talking about tax implications and capital gains. Derek was holding court like the lord of the manor, discussing his property with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his entitlement for a single moment. "I'm thinking we list it in early spring," Derek continued, completely oblivious to my presence in the doorway. "That gives us time to handle the estate paperwork, complete the renovations, and hit the market when buyer activity picks up." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Smart timing. I'll prepare a comprehensive marketing plan, and we can schedule professional photography once the updates are complete." That's when Derek noticed me watching. "Maya, you should hear this," he called out with mock generosity. "Patricia was just explaining how much the neighborhood has improved since Grandma bought the house. It's actually going to be a really good investment return for the family." For the family. As if I wasn't part of it. As if my opinion didn't matter because I couldn't contribute to renovation costs or understand property values. Derek had moved so far beyond assuming his inheritance that he was now publicly planning to profit from it, treating Rose's death like a business opportunity rather than a loss. I realized then that Derek wasn't just blind to my relationship with Rose. He was blind to everything that made Rose who she was. To him, she'd become nothing more than real estate equity and tax implications. The call came on a rainy Thursday morning in late October, exactly 3 months after Rose's funeral. I was at my desk at Meridian Design Studios, working on a logo design for a local bakery that reminded me of Rose's kitchen, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Maya Chen?" The voice was formal and slightly familiar. Yes, this is Maya. This is Harold Harrison from Harrison and Associates. I was your grandmother's attorney. I need to schedule the formal reading of Rose Chen's will. Are you available this Friday at 2 o'clock? My stomach dropped. The moment I'd been dreading for months was finally here. Yes, I can be there, I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. Excellent. I've contacted all the beneficiaries, and everyone will be present. The reading should take approximately 1 hour. Please bring a valid form of identification. All the beneficiaries. That meant Derek would be there, probably with his leather briefcase and his smug certainty. I spent the rest of the week with a knot in my stomach, unable to focus on work or sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear Derek's voice saying I'd never been close to Rose, see him spreading those blueprints across the table, remember him bringing that real estate agent to plan the sale of Rose's home. Friday morning, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear to watch my family's assumptions become legally binding reality. I finally chose the same simple black dress I'd worn to Rose's funeral. It felt appropriate for what would likely be another kind of ending. When I arrived at Harrison and Associates, the law office felt intimidatingly formal. The building was all dark wood and heavy furniture, the kind of place where important family decisions had been made for generations. The receptionist directed me to a conference room on the second floor, where I found myself face to face with the mahogany table that would soon become a battlefield. Derek was already there, of course, positioned near the head of the table like he belonged there. He wore his most expensive navy suit, the one he saved for client presentations and important meetings. His leather briefcase sat beside him, probably containing notes about property management and investment strategies. Uncle Tom sat to his right, equally well-dressed and confident. Aunt Linda had claimed a chair across from them, dabbing at her eyes with tissues in a performance of grief that looked more practiced than genuine. Mom sat quietly near the window, her hands folded in her lap, looking like she wished she could disappear entirely. "Maya," Derek acknowledged with a nod that felt more like a dismissal. "Glad you could make it." Make it. As if I were attending by invitation rather than legal right. As if my presence were optional rather than required. I took the chair furthest from Derek, the same corner position I'd always occupied at family gatherings, and tried to steady my breathing. Mr. Harrison entered the room carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd done this many times before. He was older than I'd expected, probably in his 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the careful movements of someone who understood that his words were about to change lives. "Thank you all for coming," he said, settling into his chair and arranging papers with methodical precision. "Before we begin, I want to explain that Rose was very specific about how she wanted this reading conducted. She left detailed instructions about the order of information and requested that certain documents be read in their entirety." He reached for a sealed envelope that looked different from the other legal documents, and something in his careful handling of it made my heart race. There was an almost reverent quality to the way he held it, like it contained something precious and fragile. Derek shifted in his chair, clearly eager to get the formalities over with so he could start implementing his renovation plans. None of us had any idea how wrong we all were about what was coming next. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and opened the sealed envelope with deliberate care, as if he understood the gravity of what he was about to reveal. The room fell into complete silence, except for the soft patter of rain against the tall windows and Derek's confident breathing beside me. "Before I read the standard will provisions," Mr. Harrison began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "Rose requested that I read this personal letter aloud to the family. She wrote it specifically for this moment." Derek leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone waiting for a formality to pass. Uncle Tom checked his expensive watch, probably calculating how long this would take before they could move on to the practical matters of estate management. Aunt Linda continued her tissue performance, dabbing at eyes that still looked remarkably dry. Mr. Harrison unfolded a piece of Rose's personal stationery, the cream-colored paper with tiny blue flowers that I recognized from the thank you notes she used to send after birthdays and holidays. Seeing her handwriting from across the table made my chest tighten with fresh grief. "To my beloved family," Mr. Harrison read in Rose's voice, somehow. "If you are hearing this letter, it means I am no longer with you, but I hope my words will help you understand the decisions I have made regarding my estate." Derek's confident expression didn't waver. If anything, he looked slightly bored, like this was just another step in a process he'd already mentally completed. "I have spent the last months of my life watching and listening to my family, and I have learned things that both broke my heart and filled it with joy. I discovered who truly loved me for myself and who saw me as an obligation or an opportunity." A subtle tension entered the room. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Uncle Tom stopped checking his watch. "To my dear Maya," Mr. Harrison continued, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, "who saw me not as an obligation, but as a person worth spending time with. You are the only one who truly knew my heart, who cared about my stories, who made me feel valued rather than tolerated." Derek's smile faltered slightly, but he still looked more confused than concerned. Mr. Harrison paused, glancing around the room with that same slight smile I'd noticed when Derek had made his cruel comment earlier. "Therefore, I leave my house, my savings account, my investments, and all my personal possessions to Maya Chen, who loved me unconditionally and showed me kindness when she had nothing to gain from it." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Derek's mouth actually fell open. Uncle Tom's face went white, then red, then white again. Aunt Linda's tissue dabbing stopped abruptly as she stared at Mr. Harrison, like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "This can't be right," Derek said, his voice cracking slightly. "There must be some mistake." Mr. Harrison continued reading calmly. "I want Maya to know that I changed this will 2 months before my passing, after witnessing Derek's callous comments at a family dinner where he expressed his certainty that Maya would receive nothing because she wasn't really family material." The blood drained from Derek's face as he realized Rose had heard everything. Every dismissive comment, every assumption about my unworthiness, every plan he'd made for her property while she was still alive. "I hope this decision will teach my family that love is not measured by grand gestures or public displays, but by showing up consistently, listening genuinely, and caring deeply about the person rather than what they can provide." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Uncle Tom was staring at the table, probably calculating how much money had just slipped through their fingers. Aunt Linda had actually dropped her tissues. And me? I felt Rose's presence in that room, finally speaking the truth that Derek's arrogance had never allowed him to see. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity before Derek exploded like a volcano that had been building pressure for years. His carefully maintained composure cracked completely, revealing the entitled fury beneath his polished exterior. "This can't be legal!" Derek shouted, jumping to his feet so violently that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. His face had turned a deep red that clashed horribly with his expensive navy suit. "She was clearly manipulated. Maya must have taken advantage of an elderly woman with cancer." Mr. Harrison remained completely calm, his hands folded over Rose's letter like a shield against Derek's rage. "Mr. Chen, I can assure you that your grandmother was of completely sound mind when she made these changes. In fact, she specifically anticipated this reaction and asked me to prepare additional documentation." "Additional documentation?" Uncle Tom's voice was strangled, like someone was slowly choking him. He looked older suddenly, his confident businessman demeanor crumbling as the reality of lost financial opportunity sank in. "What kind of additional documentation?" Mr. Harrison reached into his folder and pulled out a stack of papers. Rose recorded a video statement with 2 witnesses present, explaining her reasoning for the will change. She also had a complete psychological evaluation done by Dr. Margaret Santos to confirm her mental competency. Dr. Santos concluded that Rose was not only mentally sound, but remarkably clear about her motivations and desires. Derek was pacing now like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists. This is insane. I'm the eldest grandchild. I'm the one with financial experience. I'm the one who can actually manage an estate." His voice rose with each word until he was practically screaming. "Maya works at a coffee shop. She can barely manage her own life." "Actually," I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since the reading began, "I work at Meridian Design Studios now. I was recently featured in the local design magazine for my work." Derek whirled around to face me, his eyes wild with disbelief and rage. "A design job? Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea what property management involves? What kind of financial responsibility this represents?" Aunt Linda had gone completely silent, her tissue performance abandoned, as she stared at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into her family by mistake. The calculations were practically visible on her face as she tried to process how much money her son had just lost to someone she'd spent years dismissing as still figuring things out. Uncle Tom found his voice, but it came out as a desperate plea rather than his usual authoritative tone. "There has to be something we can do, some way to contest this. Maya, surely you understand that Derek is better equipped to handle this kind of responsibility. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement." "An arrangement?" Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting that Maya should ignore her grandmother's explicit wishes and hand over her inheritance to someone Rose specifically chose not to include?" The room erupted again. Derek was shouting about lawyers and legal challenges. Uncle Tom was demanding to see the video evidence. Aunt Linda was finally crying real tears, but they seemed more about lost money than lost family relationships. "You can try to contest the will," Mr. Harrison said, raising his voice over the chaos. "But I should warn you that Rose left very detailed documentation about why she made this decision, including recordings of family conversations where certain individuals discussed her estate as if she were already dead, and Maya was irrelevant." Derek stopped pacing abruptly. The recordings. Rose had heard everything. Every dismissive comment, every financial plan, every assumption about my worthlessness. The grandmother he'd taken for granted had been listening and taking notes. "She was spying on us?" Derek's voice was now a hoarse whisper. "She was paying attention," Mr. Harrison corrected firmly. "Something she apparently did better than any of you realized." For the first time in my life, I watched Derek Chen rendered completely speechless. While the chaos swirled around me, Derek's rage, Uncle Tom's desperate calculations, Aunt Linda's shocked tears, I felt something unexpected settle in my chest. Not triumph, not vindication, but a profound sense of peace that I'd never experienced before. It was like finding a puzzle piece I didn't even know was missing, and watching the entire picture finally make sense. Rose had seen me. Really, truly seen me. All those Saturday mornings when I thought I was just spending time with my grandmother, she was witnessing something that no one else in my family had ever bothered to notice. That I loved her for who she was, not what she could give me. While Derek was performing success and Uncle Tom was calculating inheritance potential, I had simply been present, genuinely present, in Rose's life. The inheritance itself felt almost secondary to this revelation. Yes, the financial security would change my life in ways I could barely comprehend. Yes, owning Rose's house meant I could preserve her memory and her garden exactly as she'd wanted. But what mattered most was the validation that my love had been recognized and reciprocated. I thought about all those family gatherings where I'd felt invisible, all those conversations where my achievements were brushed aside while Derek's were celebrated. I thought about the years of feeling like the family failure, the one who hadn't figured out how to be successful in ways that mattered to the Chen family legacy. But Rose had been keeping track of everything I accomplished. She'd saved every article, every graduation program, every small victory that the rest of the family had dismissed as unimpressive. She'd seen my authentic heart when others only saw my quiet nature as a weakness. "Maya," Mr. Harrison's voice cut through my thoughts and the ongoing family drama. "Do you have any questions about the inheritance or the legal procedures involved?" I looked around the room at my family's shocked faces, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged exactly where I was. Not because I'd won something they'd lost, but because someone who truly mattered had chosen to love and value me exactly as I was. "I have one question," I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been in this kind of family setting. "Rose mentioned recordings of family conversations. I don't need to hear them for legal purposes, but did she know how much our Saturday mornings meant to me too?" Mr. Harrison's stern expression softened into something almost paternal. "Maya, your grandmother left several hours of audio recordings explaining her decision. The overwhelming theme was how much joy you brought to her life, especially in her final months. She said you were the only person who made her feel like herself, rather than like a sick old lady who needed to be managed." Tears finally came then, but they weren't tears of sadness or even relief. They were tears of recognition, of knowing that the most important relationship in my life had been as meaningful to Rose as it had been to me. Derek had stopped shouting and was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger anymore, but something closer to bewilderment, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time and couldn't understand what he was looking at. "She really loved you," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Yes," I replied simply. "And I really loved her. That's all this ever was, Derek. Just love, no agenda, no performance, no calculation. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company and cared about each other's happiness." For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone else's approval to know I was enough. The room had finally quieted after Derek's outburst and Uncle Tom's desperate attempts to find legal loopholes. Mr. Harrison was organizing his papers with the methodical precision of someone who'd witnessed many family dramas unfold in his office. Mom sat quietly by the window, tears streaming down her face. Not from grief this time, but from what looked like relief mixed with regret. As everyone prepared to leave, Derek approached me with hesitant steps, his earlier fury replaced by something I'd never seen from him before: genuine vulnerability. His expensive suit was wrinkled from his pacing, his perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. He looked younger somehow, stripped of the confident armor he'd worn his entire adult life. "Maya," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure the others weren't listening. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded, curious about what Derek Chen could possibly have to say to me now that his assumptions about our family hierarchy had been completely shattered. We stepped into the hallway outside Mr. Harrison's office, away from Uncle Tom's continued muttering about legal challenges and Aunt Linda's shell-shocked silence. Derek leaned against the wall, his confident posture completely gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of someone who'd just realized he'd been fundamentally wrong about something important. "I never realized how much time you spent with her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All those Saturday mornings, all those phone calls. I thought you were just, I don't know, killing time or fulfilling some kind of obligation." He looked up at me with eyes that held genuine confusion. "I thought success meant everything. The job, the money, the status symbols. I thought that's what made someone valuable to the family. I thought Grandma would be impressed by my BMW and my corner office and my investment portfolio." I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "But she wasn't, was she?" Derek continued, his voice cracking slightly. "She saw right through all of that. She saw that I was visiting her because I thought I should, not because I wanted to. She knew the difference." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us had expected to find. For the first time in our lives, Derek wasn't performing confidence or superiority. He was just being honest. "I'm not saying this to get anything from you," he added quickly, as if reading my thoughts. "I know I don't deserve anything. I wanted you to know that I understand now. What you had with her was real. What I had with her was—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Transactional." I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of compassion I hadn't expected to feel. Derek's arrogance had always masked something deeper, a desperate need for approval that had led him to miss the very thing he was seeking. "She loved you too, Derek," I said gently. She loved all of us. She just needed to know we loved her back, not what she could give us. Derek nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes for the first time since we were children. I missed it completely, didn't I? All those years, I was so busy trying to impress her that I never just sat with her, never just listened. It's not too late to learn that lesson, I said. Maybe not with Rose, but with other people in your life. For a moment, we stood there as equals, two people who'd both loved the same woman, just in very different ways. And maybe, for the first time since childhood, we understood each other. 6 months later, I stood in Rose's kitchen, my kitchen now, watching golden sunlight stream through the same lace curtains that had witnessed countless Saturday mornings of love and laughter. The worn linoleum that Derek had marked for demolition still gleamed under my feet, and the old wooden cabinets that he'd deemed outdated now held my own dishes alongside Rose's cherished china collection. I hadn't changed a thing about the heart of this house. Instead, I'd lovingly restored what was already there, repairing the garden gate that had been hanging crooked, refreshing the paint in colors that honored Rose's original choices, and tending to the flower garden that Derek had wanted to replace with a deck. The roses she'd planted 20 years ago were blooming more beautifully than ever, as if they too understood they were finally safe. "Maya, the table looks incredible," Mom said, carrying a casserole dish toward the dining room where I'd set places for 8 people. It was the first family dinner I'd hosted since the will reading, and I'd invited everyone: Derek, Uncle Tom, Aunt Linda, Mom, and even a few of Rose's elderly neighbors, who'd become like family to me. The inheritance had allowed me to start my own design studio, just as Rose had somehow known it would. Chen Creative Design operated out of the converted sunroom where I could look out at Rose's garden while working on projects that combined my artistic vision with the business skills I was learning. The studio was already profitable, with a waiting list of clients who appreciated my approach to design that emphasized authenticity over trends. Derek arrived precisely on time, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a humility that still looked new on him, but increasingly genuine. Over the past 6 months, we'd developed something we'd never had before: an actual relationship. Not the performative family obligation of our childhood, but real conversations about life, work, and what we'd both learned from losing Rose. "I brought the photo albums you asked for," he said, setting down a box of family pictures from Uncle Tom's house. Dad finally admitted he'd been hoarding them because he thought they were valuable. We'd been working together to create a complete family archive, something Rose would have loved. Derek's business skills, when applied to something meaningful rather than profitable, had proven invaluable in organizing decades of family history. As everyone gathered around the dining room table, I looked at the faces of people who'd once dismissed me as the family member who hadn't figured it out yet. Some of them were still adjusting to seeing me as someone capable of hosting family dinners and managing an estate. But their opinion of me no longer determined my sense of self-worth. "Before we eat," I said, raising my glass of water, "I want to share something Rose wrote in a letter I found last week, hidden in her recipe box." I pulled out a small card in Rose's handwriting. She wrote, "The secret ingredient in every recipe isn't cardamom or love or patience. It's the willingness to share what you have with people who matter, even when you're not sure you have enough to go around." Derek smiled, genuinely this time. Uncle Tom nodded thoughtfully. Even Aunt Linda looked moved. "Rose taught me that love isn't measured by grand gestures or family hierarchies or financial success," I continued. "It's measured by showing up, paying attention, and caring about people's happiness more than their usefulness to you." As we began passing dishes around the table, using Rose's recipes and her grandmother's serving bowls, I realized that this was Rose's real legacy. Not the house or the money, but the lesson that authentic relationships are built on presence, not performance. I had finally found my place in this family, not as the overlooked one or the unexpected inheritor, but as the person who understood that love shared is love multiplied. Rose would have been proud,